such sequels are their own bad joke. But all sequels, in fact, do not suck, and you really can't paint them with such a broad brush. There are two sides to this coin, and plenty of representations of both good and bad. For example, Crocodile Dundee 2 was far superior to the first film, but something like Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, the sequel to Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, should have never been made. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was very successful, very popular, and it was just fine as it was. It should have been left alone. It needed to be left alone. It was a movie that you really couldn't do more with. Those characters were funny to watch in one film, but you're asking an awful lot to put them in another. Yeah, a little bit of them goes a long way, and we were all just fine with one film. And that one film was great, and like I said, very successful, and it would be because of that success that we got another Bill and Ted movie. And this is where the sequel that exists only to be a cash grab comes into play, because Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey was clearly that. I mean, what are you supposed to do with it? The first movie wrapped things up pretty nicely and showed no signs of a sequel, so where are you supposed to go from there? And that explains why the second movie is so batshit crazy. But it doesn't stop there, and in 2020, Bill and Ted would become a trilogy. Really think about that for a second. 2020. Bogus Journey was released in 1991. 29 years after that film was released, they decided to make a third movie. And talk about your third movie curse, because this one went nowhere except down. This was a stink bomb that stunk up the box office. People hated it. Hardly anyone went to go see it, and those that did immediately regretted their decision. There was basically no interest in this film whatsoever, because 29 years is far too long a time to wait for a sequel, especially when it's a sequel to a sequel that nobody wanted. So you really got to be careful and mind your time frame of when you release another sequel, because the longer you wait, the further the interest in whatever story you're trying to tell dwindles. Speaking of that, and speaking of the third movie curse, we're going to bring it back to Crocodile Dundee. Yeah, you might be fortunate enough not to realize that Crocodile Dundee is a trilogy, with Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, which is an easily forgotten film, mainly because it shouldn't exist, but it did do well financially. It had a $39 million box office to counter a $25 million budget, but critically it didn't do so well, and it's pretty much despised. It was widely criticized as being unnecessary and belated, which brings me back to my point, which is the time frame. Crocodile Dundee 2 was released in 1988. When do you suppose that Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles was released?
Let's see. Well, you sound pretty severe, so I'm gonna go later. How about 1995?
Nope. Guess again.
96?
Nope.
97?
Big nope.
98?
Negative.
What is it? Something like 2001?
Yep.
What?
Yeah, Crocodile Dundee 3, otherwise known as Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles, was released in 2001. Crocodile Dundee was very popular and an iconic character of the 80s. To think of him as a product of the new millennia is sort of weird, and it just did not work. So the time frame is very important. A sequel has to come within a certain number of years after the original film for it to still render its interest. But the problem with Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles wasn't the fact that people weren't interested in it. Obviously they were. They went to go see it. The box office numbers reflect that. The problem, and where all the negative criticism came from, was the fact that it was highly unnecessary. So it is possible to wait a long time to make a sequel and still have it be a success, but you have to make sure what you're doing is a necessity. Let's bring it back to the Terminator film series, which is a prime example of this. The first movie was released in 1984. The second movie was released in 91, which is a pretty long amount of time, but not too bad. Well, I guess that is a pretty long amount of time to wait for a sequel, but considering the subject matter, it doesn't really make a difference. And it didn't make a difference because people went out in droves to see this. It made no difference how long they had to wait for a Terminator sequel. They wanted to see what happens next. They needed to see this. It was a necessity because there was massive interest in the subject matter. And the film delivered quite well. It was critically acclaimed as being pretty awesome. So you can wait a long time to make a sequel, but to have it be a success, there has to be a combination of interest in the subject matter, a necessity to see it, and it has to be good. And all of these things were certainly not the case for Speed Zone, which is a movie that checked absolutely none of those boxes, and believe it or not, it is the third Cannonball Run movie.
There was a third Cannonball Run movie?
Yes, there was, and Speed Zone was it. Not that you could tell, it wasn't marketed as a Cannonball Run sequel and the name doesn't imply it at all. I don't know what they were going with here. You have to watch the movie to figure out that it's about the Cannonball Run race, which is an arduous task because this movie is pointless and dull and not funny whatsoever. It has nothing really to do with the first two movies, and you're really going to hate yourself for watching it. Now, this piece of crap was originally going to be called Cannonball Fever, and it was marketed overseas as Cannonball Run 3. But in the States, it was released as Speed Zone. It was released in 1989, only 5 years after Cannonball Run 2, so that's not that bad. But even though it was only 5 years difference, nobody gave a shit. There was zero interest in this movie. It was made on a budget of $18 million, but the box office was only $3 million. That is what you call a stinker, and it's weird to think of the Cannonball Run as a trilogy, and furthermore, it's insulting that the good name of the first two movies are now sullied by this one. It is a prime example of the third movie curse.
Watch the full episode here, as well as other classic Cat Nanos VHS pirate ship adventures. And please hit subscribe.